Strasser, a Berlin-based philosopher and founder of the Denkwerkstatt Berlin. Forgive my pronunciation. She's held posts at the Center for Cognitive Science in Freiburg and the Berlin School of Mind and Brain, and was a visiting fellow with Daniel Dennett at Tufts. She's currently an associate researcher with the Cognition, Values, Behavior Group at LMU Munich, and Anna works the intersection of philosophy, psychology, and AI, asking whether concepts like agency and intelligence actually fit these new systems, or whether we need something new. Her new book calls us something in-betweenism, and that's where we'll start today. Well, first of all, thank you very much for doing this. It's very generous for you to give me your time. I love reading your papers, particularly the one on consciousness. That really relates to a lot of the things that I'm looking at. But so you've coined the term in-betweenism, which is the title of your new book, to describe phenomena we don't yet have concepts for. What would be the simplest way of explaining that to someone hearing it for the first time?
So if you observe the debate about generative AI, you see a lot of controversial positions where people argue whether they can act or not act, or whether they are intelligent or not, or conscious or not, or living or not. And all those either or questions lead us to the extreme positions. And I think this is not right, because they have some properties we can find on the left side and some properties we can find on the right side. Therefore, I say there is a conceptual problem. We do not have the right kind of notions to describe the properties and abilities of Gen AI if we only ask either or questions and rely on dichotomous notions. So what we can say, neither standard philosophical theorizing nor dichotomous ordinary concepts enable us to think well about the in-between phenomena. And that's why I was searching for a method, how we can characterize this new phenomena where we always not agree on what we are talking of.
And what were the main points you addressed in your book, and why was that the book you chose to write at this point?
So looking back in my philosophical journey, I was always inspired by gradual approaches. So I do not like dichotomous distinctions. And I think if we look at established gradualist approaches, we can see that there are always sort of phenomena which do not fulfill the whole demanding list of conditions intellectualist notions of, for example, agency require. Look at Davidson. Davidson has a very demanding set of conditions, and hardly humans fulfill them every day. And children do not, non-human animals do not neither. And so gradualist approaches came there and developed minimal notions to allow that we can talk about acting children, acting non-human animals. And I'm just doing something more radical. I say maybe the border is not between the things we think, we Western people think are living, but maybe there are even entities like large language models who are able to act, and maybe they do not have to fulfill all the conditions we humans do have to fulfill.
You sort of touched on that in your paper, in what smart AIs can do without consciousness. So forgive me if I get this wrong, but you argue that agency and intelligence might not require consciousness after all. So, and I totally agree, but why do you come to that thought?
So maybe we have to take a step backwards first. So first we have to understand that any skills do not emerge in an instant. Not developmentally in humans, not phylogenetically in animal evolution, and I argue not technological in the design of AI systems. And if we have this sort of grades of appearances in our mind, then we can ask maybe some conditions are not necessary. And I'm totally convinced that you as a human being, you would not be able to act if you would not be conscious. I mean, maybe you had an operation and narcotic experiences. You were not able to act at the moment where you had no conscious. states. And then so I wonder whether our observation that humans need to be conscious is a necessary condition. And I think we can describe how agency and intelligence alone can can lead to behavior what is not just automated or reactive, but which is proactive and more like an agent. So, looking at your face, I did not yet convince you totally.
And that's down to my lack of knowledge or intellect than anything else. But so if we as humans require consciousness to be able to undertake the activities we undertake, why would it be that AI models that can provide intelligent output don't require consciousness? And I don't believe they do, but help me on that path a little bit.
So maybe it's easier to understand the whole idea if we imagine a multidimensional spectrum where we have a lot of conditions and they all can have different states. And some of the conditions are sort of necessary and some are not. And what we can observe in philosophy that we tend to have a list of very demanding conditions and claim they are necessary. Yeah. And what I'm provocatively say, maybe none of them are as such necessary, because I would say it is enough if we have a general term, if there's something like family resemblance in between the different instances. So just imagine, maybe it becomes clearer if we look at other disjunctive frameworks we already use. So if we think about the diagnosis of a mental health issue, there we have a disjunctive framework where we say you have to have some of the symptoms over certain time in a certain appearance, strong or weak. And then there we can describe the inter-individual differences of the different patients. And I'm just using this idea and saying, if we look at agency, maybe we certain symptoms, so maybe consciousness is just one symptom, but if they have 3 other symptoms and no conscious, maybe that's sufficient.
No, that makes sense. I remember doing one of those depression tests. You sort of go through the 30 thing. If you get 30 out of 30, something's terrible, but you can get 26 out of 30 and still be depressed. You don't have to fulfill every one of the criteria. No, that makes sense. And one of the things that you've talked about is competence without comprehension and competence with comprehension. And you said there's sort of degrees of comprehension, which makes complete sense. With your experience of AI models, where would you see they sit on that spectrum currently? Are they more towards competence without comprehension, or are they starting increasingly to lean towards competence with comprehension? A fair question.
That is a very difficult question, because what I did in my book, I did not sort of make bold claims about what properties AI systems really have, because I think this is a different problem, how we can ascribe stuff. What I did is I offered a framework how we could formalize the conditions which they have to fulfill. And the next question is, do they fulfill them? And with respect to comprehension, my intuition, and this is just momentary, I would say it may be more interesting for us to find out what kind of abilities they can have without comprehension. So can they still be a conversation partner even though they do not understand what we say? And I think there we have to look at the different approaches of the ascription practice. So we have relational approaches and we have property-based approaches. And property-based approaches do have a major problem because even in philosophy, we have no agreement on the conditions. So if you look at the theories of consciousness, we have about 250 different types of theories. And therefore, there is no agreement in the beginning, and then you cannot operationalize the conditions, and you cannot really agree on how to measure that. And the same is true for comprehension. So maybe, what I'm looking for at the moment is how we could sort of gain something like a lucky marriage between relational and property-based approaches, because the relational approach will shape our language as well. So if the majority believes they are conscious, maybe our notion of consciousness will change. And so I think we have to come from both sides. It's important to understand what kind of properties we are verified to ascribe. And there I do think that, for example, the interpretability techniques, which you can see in computer science, are a very promising line of research, but at the same time we have to say they cannot be successful until we have some agreement on the base notions like comprehension, consciousness, and stuff like that. And this problem doesn't go away if you say there are degrees of. You still need a definition of comprehension. And so this is something for future research, I would say. For my personal thing, if I take a relational approach, I feel not understood by chatbots. I don't think that they understand me, but I still think that I can have something like a conversation with them. And we have this experience in our everyday world. Sometimes you have a conversation with people who do not understand you. Or if you having exams with students, sometimes you observe them using words without understanding what they mean. And if you're talking to very drunk people, you might even ask whether they comprehend in a very minimal degree, but still you have a conversation going on. Maybe not a successful one, but
I think of that as an extreme case. I'm not sure what we call people now, but he used to have people that were savants that could answer incredibly complex mathematical problems and examples. So I could absolutely have that competence, but I had no idea how they were doing it. They couldn't explain how they got to 7y over x. They just knew that was the answer. So is that a similar thing that they absolutely have the? Did they have the competence? Yes, they do. Because they're doing they're creating the answer at least, but they have no awareness about how they're creating the answer.
I do think that this points to a different distinction. So there is the performance or the competence, and there is on the other side the way how you get there.
Yeah.
And sometimes the way how you get there is sort of available for the system who is getting there, and therefore the system is able to give reasons how it did it. Or maybe it's available for a researcher who looks at the system, and therefore the researcher can give an explanation why this process led to this result. But if we look at the large language models, we have to admit that we, in the single case, of course, it's not a miracle what's happening there. It's just the effect of the training of with the transformer architecture and the self-attention ideas. But we do not yet have really good explanations why it's coming to a certain result in a specific case. And I think to get answers to those questions, interpretability techniques are the part of research we have to look at. So those are examining whether we can give reasons why we would ascribe a world model to a large language model, or why we would ascribe a representation or a belief to something. But this is really tedious work, and it's in its infant step, I would say. Most of the research is done with toy models and not with huge large language models.
One of the things you said earlier was that you can have a conversation with a large language model, an AI, and have dialogue backwards and forwards, but are fully aware that there's no relationship there. There are a number of people that create in their own mind a relationship with their AI. It could be an AI boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, friend, associate, whatever, but they believe they form some kind of relationship. Are there inherent dangers in that, do you think?
So I do think there are major dangers, of course. I mean, distributing AI tools worldwide was not a good idea before we have had done any research on the consequences on the developmental stuff in humans. So how this use is changing us, and to sort of defend my approach, I'm not saying that if we have a multidimensional spectrum of social interactions where we can characterize instances where AI tools play a role as a social interaction partner, that does not mean that you can have any kind of social interactions with them. What I'm doing is I'm arguing, okay, we could do something together like a minimal asymmetric joint action where we put the goal in the system, and then the joint goal is sort of contributed by the system via instrumental rationality, and therefore we don't need reflective rationality in the systems. And on the other part of the spectrum, I would rather locate social interactions like deep friendship or love affairs, or at the moment I'm working on therapy, what kind of relationship is happening in a therapy. And those instances require more from the interaction partner. And therefore, I would say at the moment, I would post the claim that AI systems have no emotions, and there are relationships for which we need emotions. But it's not that easy because I think we experience toxic friendship in our everyday life as well. And this is possible with AI as well. And we have parasocial relationships to pop stars. And we know that the pop stars are not loving us back, but still they are sort of in another multidimensional spectrum of friendship. And certain kinds of friendship, I would say, for example, if you use a thick notion of friendship like Aristoteles framed with the virtue friendship, this is something where you cannot get that asymmetric, where you need more symmetry, where you need both interaction partners to have emotions. But other kinds of friendship might be possible if one of the interaction partners has no emotions, but still dangerous. So in general, I would say to have a toxic friendship with an AI is much easier than with a human.
It's fascinating. One of the things you talked about there was therapy and therapists. And I think there was an experiment, and I'll probably get the numbers wrong, but an experiment they did in the US where they set up a therapist, an online therapist, people asked questions to you, had dialogue with, had their half an hour session with. And at the end of the session, they were asked how satisfied they were with the session. And I think 82% of them said they were very or at least happy with the interaction. And they were then told afterwards that it was an AI they were in therapy with. And the change is then it became only 20% of them were happy with the interaction. Even though it was the same interaction, nothing had changed apart from the fact they were told you weren't talking to Anna Strasser, you were talking to ChatGPT 7 or whatever. Do you think we almost hold our relationships with AI to a higher standard than we do with people? Because nothing had changed. Fundamentally, the words are still the same. But yeah, had something fundamentally changed because they knew it was AI versus knowing it was a person?
I mean, First, I want to say we cannot always trust our feelings. I mean,
True.
having only a relational approach, only sort of what attitude I have in front of something, is not the secure thing. This is why I want to marry property-based approaches and relational approaches, because you need both. You need some reasons why you ascribe something, and then just because it feels like we are so easy to be tricked. I mean,
We are.
even this conversation, how do you know that I didn't build a cool digital replica of myself?
I don't. I I hope I do. I think the fact that you talked about parcel deliveries at the beginning and sort of ease into the conversation made me feel you're real. Otherwise, I think you would have gone straight into answering the questions. But it's a very clever strategy. See? Oh gosh, this is Digiana. We're coming to. I don't know. But then if I found out in an hour's time that I was talking to an AI, would I feel less satisfied? Yeah, I guess I would. Because I wouldn't necessarily. Because I'd be thinking, well, I don't know what the real Anna would have said. Would Digiana have said the same as the real Anna? But then, what does the real Anna even mean? What does real even mean in that context? If you've programmed an AI model to be you, doesn't it become you?
No, the Digi-Anna would not be reliable. And it would not evolve and it would not adapt to a new context in the way I would. So we would go apart from each other. Sometimes it might be just what I would sign as well,
Yeah.
but sometimes not. And then so I really, so my experience with my work with the DigiDan project really told me that it's not a good idea to create digital replicas. First, because they are indistinguishability and they become more and more indistinguishable. And this is a real danger because we do need something like trust, that we sort of somebody is behind the picture I'm talking to and is responsible for what kind of question it's asking me and all that stuff. And I would say that even ideas like democracy is in danger if we cannot distinguish between humans who have skin in the game and machines who don't have skin in the game in our conversation and politics strategies.
For people that haven't come across the DigiDan project, first of all, where have you been? But I'll put the link to the video in the notes because I watched it. It's fascinating. So Anna worked with Daniel Dennett to create a digital replica of him with his consent to be deleted after his death, as agreed.
Yeah,
And
and in addition, and nobody had access to it. It was not distributed. Only the researchers, so Eric Schwitzgebel, Matt Crosby, and David Schwitzgebel, and Daniel Dennett, and myself had access to this model. This was important as well.
Anna carried out an experiment, which you'll see, where there's DD1 and DD2. We don't see them or hear them. Anna asks some questions. Somebody else reads our answers back. And we, as the audience, I failed, have to guess which one is the real Daniel Dennett. And it was, it was fascinating. And did you learn something from that experiment, that experience that surprised you?
What really surprised me is that even myself could be tricked. So we made this game that Eric, for example, produced some outputs for DigiDan and mixed it with some real assertions of Dan. And I had to judge which one I think are machine written and which are human written. And even I, who prepared all the training data, I really went through everything Dan ever wrote to train the model. Even I could be tricked, and this was really sort of not only surprising but scary. But on the other hand, I'm not getting tired to say DigiDan was not reliable, and no digital replica will ever be reliable, because it's a feature of the transformer architecture that we have something like hallucination, which is an unfortunate notion. I rather would call them hypotheses.
Yeah.
And you have to test hypotheses before you can trust them.
But you talked there a little bit about democracy, and if you think of a couple of the main players in politics globally now, not necessarily democracy elected, but think of Putin or Trump as two examples. A lot of things that they say could easily be seen to be hallucinations. Contradict themselves, say something completely outlandish, row back on it, start again. So if somebody told me that Donald Trump was a DigiDonald, that wouldn't surprise me at all, really. But do you fear we'll get to a state where our politicians rely on digital versions of themselves, or we ultimately end up having digital politicians in power?
That's an interesting question. So, first, I want to say many political people seem not to care about truth. Whatever they do as speech acts is often what we as philosophers would rather call bullshit. So it's just claiming something, and it's not important whether it's true or not for them. And then so since we have this negative experience that politicians bullshit a lot, and then we have the large language models who are very good in bullshitting as well, and even can do bullshitting in a very sophisticated way, so it sounds even more reasonable. Maybe we can use it as a mirror and sort of look back to the real human behavior and say we aim to have less bullshit in our human conversations.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Well, one of the things that I've been looking at lately has been lots of names for them, but so-called grief bots. And so both my parents died in the last couple of years, and at the time I cannot think of anything worse than being able to talk to a digital version of my dad and my mum. That'd be terrible, terrible, terrible. But then I saw something on television where somebody had done this, and she said something you said. She said, well, gosh, that's exactly what my father would have said. And I don't know whether a digital version of my dad is just the next iteration of photographs of him, videos of him, voicemails of him, etc. And I don't know whether it's something that can mitigate the terrible feeling of grief that we have. I mean, why should we grieve? Well, would you say you're fundamentally opposed to the idea of grief bots?
I mean, in my personal case, if there would be a law to avoid that anybody would ever make a grief bot out of me, I would go for that.
Okay.
I would sue everybody who
Yep,
is trying to do a digital replica of myself. But this is my personal stance for me.
Yeah.
If I sort of look as a researcher to this industry of grief bots, which is really growing, there are more grief bots than you might imagine. I think it's not the next thing like having a video of your dad, because the video is static, it's not changing. And grief bots express behavior which is not static, which is sort of unreliable, something else than a memory photograph or a memory video. And I don't know, maybe in a very sort of professional therapy setting, it might be a step of sort of saying goodbye to somebody with this kind of replicas. But I would say imagine that everybody had a grief but there would be too many entities we had to talk about. So already now, attention is something what is really, really valuable. And then imagine Christmas. and you have all the people who died in your community sitting next to the Christmas tree. That would be not a nice idea. And maybe we have to embrace the idea that we are finite, and sometimes we have stopped to be there, and rather take the time where we are alive, and not sort of have this idea we could make this infinitive.
It's always been one of humankind's great search, hasn't it, been for immortality? Whether that be, drinking from the cup at the Last Supper that will give us immortality, or whatever. We've always, and maybe this is how humans think that's manifesting. But my big negative with it, and I don't agree with it, is that what we think of as memories of our parent, our loved one, our friend, whatever, quickly becomes clouded with the digital version. Is that a memory? No, it's not a memory because it didn't actually happen. So it becomes my memory of the person becomes bastardized in this hybrid digital real dead memory of them. So memories get clouded, which I think is a sad thing, because memories are, we remember certain things for certain reasons. And if you're creating new memories of the digital version of somebody, it becomes something I don't think our brains necessarily are able to cope with right now.
Yeah, and then the next question is with whom you want to talk, with your dad as he was 20 years old, or as he was 50 years old, or as he would have been if he would have lived longer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, humans change over a lifetime, at least.
Thankfully.
I'm would be surprised if you would not. And having a grief bot is a really strange thing, because this thing is not changing in the natural way, but it's of course getting new input by you as a conversation partner of the grief bot, and at a certain point of time, I would say there are not that many similarities between the grief bot you trained originally and the grief bot you're talking to. But never mind. I don't think we should do it anyway. We have enough to do to live with the living people, and to give attention to living people, and therefore we should not create digital persons which take our attention away from humans, because of course attention is sparse, and there is some kind of competition. So if you look at the companionship debate, some people say it's easier to have an AI friend. So AI friends are nice because they are always available, they never want to talk about themselves, they do not have problems, and they do not expect that much. And therefore there is a certain kind of competition. If I have to choose whether you as a human would be my friend, or this AI thing should be my friend, some people say I get more out of it if I have an AI friendship. And I think this is dangerous if you build a competition in between relationships, human-human and human-machine.
There's also the commercial side of it, because ultimately a company owns these bots, these agents, etc. And if they decide to put the price up, so instead of being $10 a month, it's $1,000 a month, or they stop doing it altogether, how do you cope with that? Is it like the person dying again? Do you have to go through the grieving process all over again? So I think there's that. Yeah, once something becomes commercial, you got to wonder whether it's something that's valued or not, really.
Yeah, so this is my idea. If I talk about in-betweenism, we have to see the differences and the similarities. And the differences are, and I am convinced that machines are, in a certain respect, like tools which can be manipulated. So if you look at the economic interest, they play a role. So, of course, if I would sell AI friends, I would have an interest to make them so attractive that you cannot stop using them. And we know that in the design of companionship, AI systems, they use research out of how people get dependent. And therefore, they use it to build in the system and make it more probably that you will end up in an emotionally dependent situation, which is not a good thing, I would say.
No.
So maybe we can step a little bit further and say what the dangerous things about or disruptive consequences of AI tools is not only de-skilling with respect to cognitive abilities, but also with respect to emotional abilities. And there I think we have to realize that emotions are something relational. So if we look at the emotional development of children, we can describe this development as an emotional co-regulation between infants and caregivers. And there you need two interactants who have emotions and are able to have emotions. And if we have too much interaction with machines, which from my perspective have no emotions, certain things are not possible. So emotional co-regulation in a therapy situation will probably not work if the AI therapist has no emotions. And this is not just because of the embodiment. So, of course, we know that the tone of my voice and my heartbreak and how I breathe and whatever is influencing you even if we do it via video. But it is also that I cannot co-regulate emotions with something what is not having emotions. And therefore, I think this is a severe reason to be very skeptical whether any AI therapist could be useful. Because, I mean, the goal of therapy is to regain the ability to regulate your own emotions in a proper way so that you are more happy afterwards. And if we do this through renewed co-regulation between humans, this makes sense to me. And if we do something like as if co-regulation with an AI therapist who has no emotions, I would be very skeptical whether it's working. And the next thing is to say they are not reliable. We are not able to align systems for sure. So of course there's a lot of work on guardrails to avoid those tragic cases you have read in the media, I think, about suicide, about increase of psychosis, about re-traumatization. And I think as a scientist, we have to be honest and say there is no secure alignment procedure so far. All the guardrails, of course, they're trying to make it more safe.
Yeah.
But this is nothing we can trust on. And the second thing is that the hallucinations will not go away by putting in guardrails. And the third thing is what even worries me even more is that it opens the door for surveillance. So everything is saved. So all the information you share with an AI therapist is screened by the company behind the AI therapy. And I think it's a good thing that doctors are not supposed to talk about the content of conversation they had with their patients. And if you are a patient of an AI therapist, you cannot be sure that the information you share is in the end used against you. And the same is true for companionship robots or chatbots.
Absolutely. And if people don't tend to read the terms and conditions, but you'll always find on page 78 of 300, it'll say any data you provide can be used to train our models and will remain anonymous, but et cetera, et cetera. And it's in there. You see, you signed up for it. You can't say you haven't, but you haven't read page 78 of 300 pages of terms and conditions.
Yeah, and then if you look at the research about data protection, we know that the majority of all the companies who sell digital replicas as friends or as a therapist or whatever are not very good with data protection.
No.
They are often very easily to be hacked. It's not only the bad company behind it which might misuse the thing. it's the risk that anybody else could sort of come with some knowledge and get the information out of it. And if we look at the power situation in the US, I mean, we do know that the Secret Service has the right to ask companies for detailed private information about assertions of people who had conversation with AI.
Yeah,
And this is dangerous.
absolutely. One of the things you mentioned there was de-skilling. And I guess there's an example for people. Most people now use a GPS or a sat nav to find their way somewhere. They wouldn't be able to drive to their local town without using a sat nav because they've always had it. What are the cognitive skills you think we're at risk of losing now if we are almost outsourcing to AI?
I think first, critical thinking is in danger. The ability to understand complex text
Yeah.
is in danger. The ability to discuss about what is a good reason to sort of go from several perspectives to look at a topic. This is in danger. And the next thing is that we might become much more similar in what we sort of deliver as written stuff. So the research about the homogenization. So all the essays students write with AI are more similar to each other, even though they might be, from a teacher perspective, better than a self-written essay, but they are not original anymore. So original thoughts probably become less. But I don't know. I mean, you started with the GPS example, and many people say it doesn't matter that we don't have those orientation skills anymore. But I think we should always realize this makes us dependent. I mean, how can you orient if your internet is not working? And those things happen. I mean, there are a lot of situations where you do not have access to that. And how can you orient yourself if somebody doesn't want you to orient? And then therefore, I think it would still be good if we would have at least a bunch of people who are able to orient themselves without Google Maps. And therefore, I cannot think of a skill which I would say it doesn't matter if we don't have it anymore. Because losing a skill, even if something is reliable what you can use instead of your skill, is making you dependent on technology. And maybe it's better not to be as dependent as possible.
And GPS is a great example. We've had examples in our media. I'm sure you've had the same. Somebody's driven into a river because GPS has said turn right at the bottom of the road. Somebody's gone up a road that's one way, but the GPS told me to. They slavishly follow it as if it's the oracle of all knowledge, not thinking, well, I'm driving into a river. is that the right thing to do? Nope. GPS told me to. Or ChatGPT said this is the answer. That's when you almost take away your own agency to override technology. That's when I think it becomes particularly dangerous. When you really are.
Yeah, but it is risky. So many people. I would say if you have a lot of interaction with ChatGPT, you will be impressed how sophisticated some stuff is. You get out of it, and then you start trusting, and then you stop the necessary verification process, which you should always do if you are confronted with machine generated text, and we are lazy beings, and it's tedious to verify everything you get as a suggestion. And if you get many good suggestions, you are more likely to sort of say the next one will be good as well. But this is not true. They are not reliable. 30% of assertions ChatGPT is giving is wrong, and we should realize that before we sort of say it doesn't matter if certain skills are not in our brain realized anymore. But I think the emotional skills are more important than the cognitive skills.
Yeah. Well, one of the things so we talked about how difficult it is to distinguish between a digital version of ourselves and a real version of ourselves. So you wrote a paper on the increasing difficulty in how our trust in written sources has been corroded. It's very hard now, no matter how clever the scanning system is, it's very hard to distinguish between human writing and machine writing in many ways. And I think one of the things you said, this has a potential to trigger an epistemological crisis. I'm saying that wrong. And you said careless and widespread use has a potential. How do we decide who defines what is careless use of AI? I think widespread has already happened, but careless use of AI, who becomes the arbiter of what's careless and what isn't?
I mean, so maybe I'm too strict, but I think any use of machine-written text without doing a verification process is careless. And then, so I can give you several examples. So we all know, everybody who's teaching in university knows that we have essays which are polluted by hallucinated references.
Yes.
And this is not just the students. This is also to be observed in sort of proper academic researchers who publish in high-impact journals. So even in high-impact journals, you find in the references pollution, which it's like environmental pollution, I would say. There are hallucinated references. And then if you go back and, for example, using Google Scholar, and you type in your own name, it's happened quite often with many people already that they find hallucinated references which are ascribed to them. So you will find out what you haven't yet written. And then, therefore, I would say 10 years ago, you could trust Google Scholar because it was a software which is sort of researching in reliable data sources to give you the references, and you could search for topics, and that was really nice to do. Nowadays, if you do a search with Google Scholar, you have to check whether this paper is real, whether the author really wrote that, and you have to look for it. You cannot trust that anymore. And so I think we already are in a situation where certain databases are polluted. And therefore, I'm worried that we get more and more paranoid, and need to spend more time in checking and verifying stuff than we did need to spend before AI polluted many databases. And therefore, transparency is a nice thing. If we could have watermarks and knew which of the stuff we are finding in the internet is machine generated, and which of the stuff might be machine generated but verified by an expert, on which is human written. If we could distinguish that, we would be in a much better situation. But I do not see that we can return to a stage where we can distinguish that.
It becomes very hard, doesn't it? Because if somebody quotes from a paper and that paper exists, but that paper's been written by AI, but it's been accepted by a paper, by a book, by a magazine or whatever. It's hard. How far back do you have to go to check whether it exists or not, or whether it was?
So maybe in the end, maybe we only trust written books in libraries which were published before 2020.
Yeah.
I mean, we have this story, so you could buy books about mushrooms at Amazon, which were totally machine written and suggest to eat death poisoned mushrooms.
Yeah.
So we have these examples, and I mean, of course, I cannot judge how polluted our databases are already, but I think that we have to put some energy in thinking how we can sort of rescue certain kinds of databases to not be polluted. And I'm not saying that everything AI is doing is bad.
No,
but we have to verify it before we sort of let it out.
It feels that we're in a place with AI, perhaps where we were with social media. So in the UK, I'm not sure about Germany, but in the UK, we've just banned social media for under 16-year-olds. And there's a curfew from, I think, midnight to 6 a.m. for 16, 17-year-olds. But none of those guardrails were thought of when social media was invented. Social media was going to connect us around the world, make lots of new friends, but it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It sort of feels that the situation place we're in with AI is almost mirroring that. That we're trying to create these guardrails. We have a saying in the UK, closing the stable door after the horse has bolted. It's like this thing's happened. Trying to put guardrails in now. Not saying we shouldn't, but it sort of feels 3 years too late.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to undo pollution. I mean, of course, it would have been more intelligent not to start pollution, but that's true for climate change as well.
Absolutely,
It would have been much more intelligent to not do that beforehand, but since we have done it and we still do it, we should sort of try to undo it, at least in certain domains and in risk domains where people, I mean, I don't want to lose the ability to judge whether a certain source is serious or reliable. And I mean, it already happens. So looking, for example, at the email you sent me with the question you might ask me, I'm not saying I'm not trusting you, but a friend of mine told me, Anna, how can you be sure whether this person didn't just use an AI to go through your written work and come up with those questions? Why do you believe that this person has read anything or invented the question himself? And what can you say to prove that?
Well, hopefully my description of the DigiDan video proves that I've watched the video and not just watched a summary of what that is. My interest in particularly the AI consciousness paper, hopefully I got enough from it that I didn't just read a summary of it. But no, I do honestly, in the research that I do, I will ask AI to summarize papers to almost to find out how relevant they are, and then it helps me sift the ones I then want to go into and read in much more detail. There's so much information out there. I use it as what's the right word? Almost a pre-research tool. But I think if I'm gonna talk to somebody, I think I owe them the respect to at least have read some of the work. Not every single thing they've written. You've written a lot, but at least the ones you sent me. It'd be rude of me not to have read those. But hopefully the questions are aligned with what you've written and don't seem completely random.
No, I'm not saying that.
No,
I mean, I wouldn't talk to you if I would believe that you're using AI tools in this careless way. But I say it is becoming difficult if you don't sort of build up a relationship. So we exchanged emails, and you pointed to certain papers, and we see each other, and we have this conversation right now, and all this makes me more sure I can rely on you. But if I only would have the questions with no story before, no story behind, then it might be difficult. I mean, I don't want to have this attitude. I don't want to believe that every student is cheating. I don't want to believe that everybody is lazy and just giving me machine-written excerpts of anything.
I hope they're not.
And I think we have to fight for it to say and make it's the effort we put in our intellectual work makes us happy. The effort is worth it. and it's much nicer to talk to somebody who has put some effort in something than talking to a chatbot is not the same.
Do you have a feeling that we're getting close to what some people call artificial general intelligence?
I don't know. I don't hope so. I mean, I totally understand the idea that, as you described, you can use an AI tool to sort of scan a lot of publications and then decide which one you really want to read.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, many people use AI tools to produce more publications. And then I think less would be more.
Yeah. It's interesting. My daughter's studying philosophy. She's in her first year at Leeds University. She's doing philosophy, ethics, and religion. And she's completely opposed to AI. She won't use it. She thinks it's terrible for the environment, terrible for our brains. Very much. But I know there are people on her course that are using it. So when she's at home and she's spending hours and hours and hours over a 1,000-word essay, whereas I know somebody else has put into ChatGPT, write an essay that proves blah blah blah. And I'm glad she's doing it her way. But I think there's probably a balance between using it for some things, but obviously not letting it take over. And I think we're finding increasingly in America, in particular when you do surveys, I think the trust of AI was 80% 12 months ago, and now it's sort of 30%. People starting to trust AI outputs more and more, really, less and less rather, which I think it's good that people are suspicious of AI and want validation and want some proof. I think that's a good thing, rather than accepting, a bit like the GPS, accepting that turn left is the right thing to do, even when you're going to a river.
Yeah, and I do think it's a really important question whether we should waste energy for stupid stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there is the economic situation that people want to earn money with AI tools.
Yeah.
But if you use it for everything, for useless stuff, and even for stuff what other people could do better, maybe it would be nice to see your footprint of each prompt you're applying, so you can sort of have some awareness of what you're doing there. I mean, especially if we look at the heat waves right now in Europe,
Absolutely.
we should be very, very, very reflective about when we use energy and when we don't. And maybe it would be better if you wouldn't use it that much.
I mean, in the UK, I think 2,500 people, more than the norm for this time of year, have died because of the heat wave. And if you start thinking about, gosh, what are the things that are causing the heat wave, actually relating to real impacts on people, it makes it very real. Yeah. I don't want to take a whole day, so well, I do, but I won't. So just one more question, if that's okay. Looking ahead, this is an impossible question, so forgive me in advance. What would be the one question about AI, agency, intelligence that you want philosophers to take seriously that perhaps we're not currently?
I mean, so my recommendation would be always search for similarities and differences. So don't make the mistake like the people I call in expectation of AGI view people, saying that everything we find in humans we find in machines as well. But don't make the other mistake like the positions which I framed as hardcore instrumentalists, and claim that nothing can be found in machines what we describe in humans with words like intelligence, social cognitive abilities, or agency. So I think it is a difficult question how we will proceed in the future, But I think we have to realize that the world is much more difficult than our dichotomous notions offer to us. So there are many shades of gray in between. And this sounds paradoxical, but this is much more colorful out there. And there are a lot of in-between phenomena which we cannot yet describe properly, and we always have to fight with problems like vagueness or something's getting too minimal. And I would hope that we spend more time in sort of realizing, if I'm having a social interaction with a machine, what are the differences to full-fledged social interactions with machines. So if we realize that more clearly and say, okay, I would not go into a deep emotional relationship with this because I don't believe they have emotions, but I can go in a more intellectual relationship and use it for certain research things, I would be much more happier. But in general, I think we should not, and this is not about philosophy, but this is more about computer science. I don't think that we should stay at this architecture. Having an architecture, the transformer architecture, which is not reliable, which is always having hallucination as a feature, is not the science we were really wanting. So you would never buy a calculator which is only giving you in 70% of the cases the right answer.
No.
You would never do that.
It's
And
double
therefore,
optimism.
why should we sort of implement a technology with this feature of not being reliable? Maybe we should sort of put more research in how we can verify assertions. And maybe go back to some ideas of symbolic AI to not have all the disruptive and pollutions and epistemological crises in the end.
I know I said that was the last question. Just one more. So I know you've just finished In-Betweenism. I'm sure that was a real labor of love. But do you know what your next book's going to be about?
At the moment, I'm interested in sort of, so if I imagine this multidimensional spectrum of social interactions, and so I was working more on asymmetric joint actions in the domain of labor, where there's a goal and we achieve a goal together, and then the artificial counterpart is essentially contributing to that. And now I'm more looking in the other edge of the spectrum and look at what kind of social interactions require more demanding conditions of both, require more symmetry. And so I wrote a paper together with a colleague called Joshua Rust, where we were looking at the question, we can work together with machines, but we cannot live together with machines. And we look to that through the lens of what kind of social affordances can machines be for us. And the other project I'm having at the moment is that I want to concentrate on the emotional de-skilling effects of artificial intelligence, especially in the developmental phase. So I'm having a project with a friend in the UK where we will look how might it sort of, what kind of consequences we can anticipate if young people have more interactions with chatbots than with other humans. Will they unlearn self-regulation? Will they be worse in having secure attachments to other people? And I think I would be very happy if we could all step some steps backwards and not make a world experiment and look at real people, what is happening to them, but do more research to anticipate what dangers there are. And then I think parents, if they would be informed about the consequences, they would think twice whether it's a good idea to open the chatbots for their kids.
I can't wait to read those. Maybe I can come back on again and talk about those when you're finished. Well, thank you very much for your time. I truly hope I was talking to the real Anna Strasser. I think I was. This is far more enjoyable than talking to a chatbot, for me at least. So no, I really appreciate you sharing your time and yeah, forthright views. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for taking the time again. And I want to reassure you that I believe that you're real and that your questions were real as well.
Excellent. As were your answers. Right. Have a great day.
Okay, bye.